All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, as always, thank you all for joining Entrepreneurial Appetite. Give me one moment, I'm going to share my screen. As you all know, the chat is disabled today, and I can't figure out how to get it to work. So if you have questions or you got a comment and you got something you want us to address, that maybe you read the book or you want to know about the book, you should still be able to use the Q&A function, and that's how we'll interact with you as the audience. But before we get started, let me do my introduction. My name is Langston Clark. I'm the founder and organizer of Entrepreneurial Appetite's Black Book Discussions, a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. Today, we have the honor of hosting Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts, who is one of the editors of Race, Work, and Leadership, New Perspectives on the African-American Experience. She is a professor of business at the University of Virginia in the Darden School of Business. So I want you all to know, those of you who donate to the podcast, those of you who are patrons of the podcast, 10% of whatever you give goes to an endowment that I started at my alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, that I started with two of my, well, I don't want to say two of my homeboys, a homeboy and a homegirl of mine, who are also Aggies, who started at A&T and have all matriculated to getting our PhDs. And so our endowment is called the From A&T to PhD Endowed Scholarship, and it is in the College of Education and Human Development at, as I said, my beloved alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. Also want to make you all aware that as I am a university professor, I collaborated with two of my homeboys, Dr. Alvin Logan and Dr. Brandon Crooms, to transform our class into a pod class. And so we all had the same advisor through our doctoral studies, and we all TA'd this class called African Americans in Sport. And so we take the content from that coursework and we make it available to a broader public, where folks who are college students, who are young professionals, who are just interested in the broad range of things that happen in the arena of sport, can get access to conversations about the sporting experience broadly, not just the athletes, but the people who work on the business side, the people who work in student athlete development, all of that. And so without further ado, I am excited for us to get started with our conversation with Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts. And those of you who are joining us now, the chat is disabled today, but if you have questions or concerns or things you want us to address, you can use the Q&A function and we will try our best to get to that. So I want to get started first and foremost by asking Dr. Morgan Roberts just to tell us a little bit about who you are, what is your journey, and how did you become a business professor? How did you get to become interested in business from a research perspective?
I am glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I love what you're doing. I love your love of books and your desire to bring books to our communities. I think that was something that I always wanted to do. I grew up in Gary, Indiana in the 1980s. And at that time in the 1980s, we were, well, in the 70s and 80s, actually. So about a decade after the Jacksons left, you may have heard of the Jacksons. So you see a little snippet of Gary, Indiana. It was predominantly Black, post steel mill. And so the economy was floundering, crime rates were increasing. Gary had gone through a significant demographic shift because of the economics, but also because of the politics, because Gary was one of the first US cities to elect a Black mayor, Mayor Richard Hatcher in 1968. So I was always aware of race and the intersections of race and economics and politics, and how they shaped the lived experiences for individuals and for broader communities. Now, I also as a child of multiple generations of Gary family, had a great grandfather who was the principal of
Mm,
Gary Roosevelt High School, where the older Jacksons attended, but he
yeah.
actually retired. He was principal for 30 years and he retired when my father graduated from Roosevelt High School. Um, my grandmother, grandfather, they're educators, business owners in Gary. My father is an orthopedic surgeon.
Mm,
So grew up in a working class environment where a lot of families were just, some were still working at the mill, but a lot were, trying to find other um, economic and career opportunities, ways to provide for their families. I attended the Gary Public Schools, as did my older sister and my younger sister. But in that context, the other Black professionals, the other doctors and lawyers, to be
yeah.
specific, most of them in my generation sent their kids to private schools,
Mm,
either in the area surrounding Gary
yeah.
or as far as Chicago. We're only 30 miles outside, 30
Oh,
minutes outside
okay. Yeah.
Chicago. We're
Yeah.
Northwest Indiana.
Yeah.
Um, so I was also always aware of dynamics around privilege.
Yeah.
So there's the structure of race, there's the need for a vibrant and flourishing economy. And I saw that on a macro level,
Yeah.
right? I also had privilege
Mm,
in my family's immediate resources, but also what I was able to experience and observe outside of Gary.
yeah.
So there were lots of places that I was able to go outside of Gary. There were lots of dreams that I had, and I was able to make a plan and navigate my education, navigate my career, with a lot of support and a lot of encouragement, a lot of guidance,
Mm,
and again, resources to be able to manifest those. But I went to school with people who were just as smart, just as interesting, and had dreams just like mine, but
yeah.
had to struggle a lot more to get to the same places that I was trying to go, that my sisters and I were able to go.
Mm,
So there was part of me, the business part. There's the literature part, which was, I always loved books, always loved words. I love the arts. They always spoke to me. Um, and when I think about, some of the experiences I had that really made me sort of understand the ways of the world worked, it was experiences I had with books, reading books, or listening to authors talk
mm,
about their work. So that was always, I think, a part of my dream and my desire, and still remains so. The
mm-hmm.
business piece
Mm,
came in on just this more of the practical desire and the activist desire to have equal opportunities, equal resources, um, the freedom and the liberty to truly be able to dream and become our best selves and live our best lives. So I just kind of put those two
yeah.
together. Um, we can talk more about it, but those are some of the themes that come out in
Yeah.
Ready Work and Leadership. So that's
Yeah.
why I tell the story
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that way today too. It's, thinking about how the opportunities that we've had in the workplace and the opportunities that we've been denied in the workplace
Yeah.
create these structural barriers that don't just impact us as individuals and whether or not we have a particular title or get a promotion or a degree, but they impact our families and they impact our communities. And so I was always passionate about this conversation around race, work, and leadership. Now, it took me nearly 20 years into my career to actually be able to publish this book. And we can talk
Yeah.
about that, and what that journey was and why it took so long to be able to publish the work. But I think the desire was always there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed, and I missed talking to you about this in our conversation before we got started. You have your own business, right? You have your own consultancy, and
Mhm.
so can you talk about how? Because you talked about how like your past experience has shaped you becoming a professor, right, in the study of business and how it
Mhm.
affects our communities. But how has that impacted your entrepreneurial life, or and what might be the overlap of those two?
Yeah, so I used that word freedom
Mm,
intentionally, very quite intentionally. The um, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and I felt that the academic path would provide me with that
yeah,
in ways that, even though I care about work and workforce engagement, I'm an organizational psychologist, um, but I wanted to be able to have that insider outsider perspective
mm,
and voice and freedom of expression so that I could document and share some of the struggles, the dynamics, challenges to audiences in broader ways
yeah,
where people who work inside the organization often don't feel as free to speak
yeah.
their truth and to
That's
share
right.
their truth. So I see myself as someone who can amplify and advocate through that space and that role.
Yeah,
But as we talk about in the book and in many other places, there are ways in which higher education and academia can be confining as well. And so I I was always on the fence about I probably had like a toe in and a foot out around how much I wanted to play the game of politics, even within academia
yeah,
and within higher ed.
yeah.
So I went to college. I'm going to get to the entrepreneurial part,
Okay.
but just to get back about my career track. So I grew up in Gary, like I said. I left home at 15 to go to the Indiana Academy for Science, Math, and Humanities, which was about 3.5 hours away from my home. It was on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. So I'm up in Northwest Indiana,
Mm,
going down to Central Indiana to go to this statewide academy for gifted and talented students. So that was residential. So I moved into the dorm, left, I basically haven't left colleges since.
yeah,
So then I went to UVA undergrad, which is where I'm now back as a professor. But I went to UVA undergrad, and then immediately after that, I knew by my second or third year at UVA that I wanted to be a professor, that I wanted to be
mm,
a researcher, I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to have this academic life with some freedom of expression and some degree of autonomy, some control over my time and my schedule. That my 9 to 5 internship at a bank in human resources for several summers that didn't afford, and I was
no,
like, yeah,
no,
I'm
mm-mm.
gonna try this other. So I immediately went to grad school at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, organizational psychology. Um, Took me a while to get data for my dissertation because I decided I wanted to write my dissertation on race and
Mm,
the experiences of Black professionals. And surprise, surprise, not a lot of companies were enthusiastic about supporting that research.
yeah,
So it ended up taking me 6 years to finish my PhD. But even with that, by the time I finished, I was only 26, 27 years old when
yeah.
I started
That's
my first
young.
job because
That's
I went
really
straight
young.
through
Yeah,
everything, right? So that's
yeah,
very young. That's still very young.
yeah.
Um,
Wait a
and then
minute.
my
Wait, whoa,
first
whoa,
job,
whoa, whoa. Time out. Because I'm
yeah,
doing this math. It took you 6 years to finish the doc program,
right, four
and
years of college.
you finished you finished the doc program when you were 26.
Yeah,
You
26, 27, maybe
That's
27.
like really fast. That's
I
that
finished, no, it was 26.
that's
Yeah.
really fast.
Yeah. So all this to say, like, I'm head down in the books.
Yeah.
Okay, like this is the
Mhm.
opposite of living an entrepreneurial life.
Yeah.
Michelle Obama talked about in her first book, Becoming, how she's called it being a box checker. And
Mm.
she's like, I was a box checker.
Yeah.
I figured out what I needed to do. And I'm like, I like the A's. I wanted to make the A. Like I set out my path and I was head down in the books. And so with all of that and a whole lot of grace, um, ended up in my first job after grad school, which was a faculty position at Harvard Business School.
Mm.
So there are a number of things that were attractive about Harvard Business School, and not the things that you might think, where
Mm.
people were like, oh, it's just because it's Harvard and it's elitist. And so you have to, because it's Harvard. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure if that's an attractive for me. Like, I'm a Black
Mm.
girl from Gary, Indiana. Like, I'm Black, I'm basic Black. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not like no fancy, big story, global cosmopolitan story to tell. Like, I am basic Black, Gary, Midwest. These are
Yeah.
my sensibilities. This is my grounded worldview. I don't know. I don't know about that part. But there were a couple of things that were very attractive. And one is, we're talking about race, work, and leadership. David Thomas, who is now the president of Morehouse
Yeah.
College, was a co-editor of Race, Work, and Leadership. Well, he was one of the very influential faculty who advocated for me to be hired at Harvard Business School when I was coming out of grad school at the University of Michigan. And I knew that he had done seminal work on race in the workplace.
Yeah.
So I thought this would be a wonderful learning opportunity for me. And it was, lo and
Mm.
behold, it was a whole lot of other stuff too. But
Yeah.
it was a wonderful learning opportunity for me in that respect. The other thing that I liked about Harvard Business School was that they cared, they valued, and still do, speaking directly to practitioners.
Mm.
And this is where my consulting really began and was born. So I'd done a bit of internship because I didn't want to just be an ivory tower stereotype of the academic who, can't talk to people and is only, can't I couldn't go home and say that I had
Yeah.
done something
Yeah.
that my community, my home community in Gary would, feel was a value and impact for them. I didn't want to be intellectually that removed.
Yeah.
The day-to-day experiences, hopes, dreams, struggles of the people that I cared for and who had cared for me. And so Harvard Business School, now they're a little different because they go directly to the C-suite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they aren't necessarily talking to, my friends, aunties, uncles, parents, grandparents, and so forth. They're, going directly to see, but it was speaking to practice,
Yeah.
speaking to practice. So from there, I was able to learn, okay, what parts of my journey, what parts of the research are addressing the needs that people have immediately.
Yeah.
And I started building out my consulting from there. It really took off, not surprisingly, in summer of 2020.
Yep.
But I had already been doing a lot of consulting. I had a little workshops. We had Race, Work, and Leadership had come out in fall of 2019. So when all of these companies were like, oh, wait, now they want us to have something to say about Black people. We have things to say about diversity and inclusion, but we don't really have anything to say about Black people.
Yeah.
Say about other groups and other topics, but we don't really have anything to say about race. Who knows something about race? Then I started to get a lot more phone calls about this work in particular.
Yeah.
But as an organizational psychologist, I've been doing a lot of consulting about tapping into your best strength, your best self, identifying and leveraging your strengths, thinking about how the different parts of your identities are resources that help you to add value in your organizations. So that, I think though that's more of the evolution and how it came into my my career from an entrepreneurial standpoint. I have
Yeah.
to say, and I talked to my teammate about this a lot. 95% of what I've done is referral based. I don't pitch.
Mm.
I don't promote to get business per se, because I have a full-time job as a professor.
That's right.
But there are pros and cons to that,
Yeah.
Langston. I mean, when I'm teaching other people who are business school students about, how do you want to launch your startup? How do you want to establish your business? Um, I probably advise them to be maybe a little bit more strategic about what they want to deliver, when, and how.
Yeah.
I found myself being a lot more responsive. I'm just being candid because we're having that kind of conversation this December. This is one of the ways that I'm trying to grow as an entrepreneur, especially going into 2023. I found myself, because I've had this broad experience and these set of skills, I find myself being very responsive and doing a lot of, customized offerings for different organizations and groups. But that's not the most efficient and the most sustainable way
Yeah.
to really grow and drive a business. When you want to have impact and you want to be able to scale. So right now with my business, mostly it's me.
Yeah.
And that's worked out really well. But if things happen and I were in an unfortunate circumstance where I couldn't show up and deliver in the ways that I had been showing up and delivering, then most of the things related to my consulting, to my business, will come to an halt. And that's not a position that you want to be in as an entrepreneur. So if it were my bread and butter, that'd be a very vulnerable
Yeah, it'd be
position.
risky. Facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I would say that one of the ways that you've been able to scale your work, right, is editing and putting together this book, right? So you've given us your story.
Yeah.
So talk about what's the story behind the book? Like, how did you, Anthony Mayo and
Yep.
Dr. David Thomas come together to put this book together? And how did you determine who the
Yeah.
authors would be? I also want to note that you made a very important mentioning of David Thomas,
Yes.
because what I heard you say was that he was an advocate. It seemed like he was a mentor and a sponsor.
And a
And those
sponsor.
are things that are talked about in the book.
Yeah.
And so as we get to
Yeah.
some of the sections and chapters in the book, we'll come back to some of those concepts.
Yeah, and I know, Langston, that one of the things that you want us to talk about is like these intergenerational dynamics among Black leaders, right?
Yeah.
As we think about the future later in our conversation
Mm-hmm.
tonight. So let me just foreshadow that a little bit to tell you how I was able to be involved in this project, in the conception and the creation of this project. So when I joined the faculty of HBS in 2002, there were two Black tenured professors. There were three at the school. One of them, Jim Cash, was the first Black tenured professor at Harvard Business School. He was in technology and operations. He was in a different area. David Thomas and Linda Hill were both in organizational behavior.
Mm.
Linda was the second tenured and David was the third Black professor at Harvard Business School tenured. Okay, this is important because down the road, I'm not going to give you the long version of the story tonight because we're going to get to the book. Maybe on another day, if there's an autobiography, then we'll come back and talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But short version, so like I told you, I was pretty young when I came to HBS. I decided not to stay. So I stayed for 7 years, but I decided not to stay and go up for tenure. There were a lot of reasons behind that. My shorthand would be, as I think about my own career journey and many of the things that I've dealt with and the decisions I've had to make, there have been moments when I've had to stop and look at this book and look at all these papers and say, I am the data.
Mm.
Like if I'm writing it, if I'm researching it, if I'm studying it, I'm capturing all these other people's experiences, all these other Black people's experiences. Why would I think that I am immune from these
Yeah.
experiences, immune to
Yeah.
these experiences?
Yeah.
So I have had to make a number of choices along the way because I have been trying to navigate so many of these dynamics around race, gender, oppression, and so forth. So in that, I left HBS. Now, that was not a popular decision. I mean,
Mm.
most of the time people leave, you either leave because you have something better lined up, or you leave because they told you to leave.
Yeah.
Like, it's not working out. It's not going to work out. You need to go find something else. My situation was neither. Mine was like, I'm leaving because in my spirit, it's time for me to leave. They were like, where are
Yeah.
you going? I'm like, I will find something. So that was what I did. So I had another job, taught other places and navigated and all of that. Here's the blessing though. They continue to support me in different
Mm.
ways. Okay.
Wow.
Exactly. Even in making a decision like that, which I know was hard for them, I know it was disappointing for them, they continue to support me. So years later, Harvard Business School had committed to commemorate the founding of the African American Student Union. It was founded in 1968. The same year, a lot of other important things happened around race in our country. Black students at HBS were organizing and like, we want some of that here too. So they
Yeah.
founded an African American Student Union. So in 2018, we were commemorating the 50th anniversary of that founding.
Mm.
So Linda Hill called me and said, Laura, will you come to HBS as a research scholar and help us with, re-examining the history, developing some programming and events, and writing some articles, and maybe even a book. So the maybe even a book is what ended up being Race
Yeah.
Leadership. Now, David Thomas and I sat down, so knew he would be a co-author, and Tony Mayo, who's a professor at Harvard Business School now, was also instrumental in all of the ASU 50 work and efforts. He was really the boots on the ground, very instrumental with all of that. David and I sat down and we were like, okay, what would be the most impactful thing that we could do with this opportunity?
Mm.
We said, well, let's send out an open call for submissions. Let's send it out to people that we know in the field, but let's also invite them to send it around to other people. And then let's see what we get. So we put out an open call for submissions for this edited volume, Race, Work, and Leadership, that we hoped would be published by Harvard Business Review if the editors agreed to publish it based on the strength of the proposal. And so we got a lot of, as you can see, incredible submissions.
Yeah.
The two Harvard chapters were specifically invited. The chapter about Henry Louis Gates Jr., the first, a case study on leading change, because he had delivered that as a keynote for commemorating our event with
Yeah.
African American Union founding. So you'll see that story here in the book. So that was one piece that was invited. And then we also invited from the law school, Harvard Law School, David Wilkins and Brian Fong, to share their data about the career trajectories of Black women graduates of Harvard Law School, because we knew they had that data and it would fit well within the book. But it was really exciting to see who submitted and to see what they submitted, and then to sit back and put all of the, organize all of these different chapters and studies into a format that would give different perspectives on race, work, and leadership.
Yeah. So there are 5 sections in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And just for the audience, those of you who haven't read it, there's history, there's comparative studies, phenomenological studies, which is lived experiences, theorizing leadership, and the future.
Yeah.
Talk about, I liked how you all started with the history piece. I had no idea about the founding of the African American Student Union and Harvard Business School and what those folks went on to become. And the best way for me to describe it without spoiling it for those who haven't read the book is that, to me, their founding of that was exponential, right? I don't remember the exact number, but maybe like the first year was like 5 of them or something like that, maybe 4 or 5.
5 to start with, yeah.
The next year was like way more, right? And the next year is way more, right? And so there's some really interesting stories about how these young folks at Harvard Business School took advantage of the moment. And then we end with the future, which also has some interesting things. So just talk about the structure of the book and the arc from the history of the future, and then we'll get into some specific questions about some concepts that really stood out to me in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I I love the arc that you just shared. So, I mean, I'll just add a couple of other pieces about the middle, because I do think that history is the anchor, right? We really can't understand and appreciate where we are and the challenges that we're dealing with if we don't acknowledge the journeys that we have all had to take individually, but also collectively as a people. How can you have a conversation about race, work, and leadership and not use an historical lens? Because race was fundamentally intertwined with the concept of work and labor
Yeah.
on US soil, on Central American and South American soil, and in many other parts of the world that still abide by caste systems where often the lower caste workers have browner skin.
It's true.
So these continuums around phenotype and, though inaccurate and socially constructed, they do correlate consistently with our roles in these occupational hierarchies and the earning potential that one has and the leadership potential that one has based on where and how they're positioned. So people don't have any problem with Black people working. That's
That's
not
right.
the problem.
Not the issue.
It's not the issue. And in many sectors, it's still not the issue. You go in healthcare, you will see many women of color working.
Yep.
What are their roles?
That's right.
Who's in a senior leadership position? Who's running that hospital system? Who are the principal investigators on those grants? Who are those are some of the questions that we ask in the middle sections of the book. But how to even interpret the disparities that we highlight through the data, you have to take a historical lens to just think about how
Yeah.
deep-seated some of the patterns are that we're trying to address. So I think those pieces are important. I think it's also important to acknowledge historically that there have always been Black spaces that have advocated for the growth and development of Black people. So there's a piece on HBCUs and the roles that they've played. I thought that was important, that a
Mm.
book coming out of Harvard Business School on race, work, and leadership needed to have an explicit focus at some point in the book, an acknowledgement and recognition of HBCUs,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of leadership development happening in a lot of spaces. And in many of those spaces, what I call leadership incubators, are not predominantly white spaces.
Facts.
The leadership incubators are the Gary, Indiana classrooms where Black History Month was 12 months out of the year,
Yeah.
and all of us knew the words to lift every voice and sing.
Hmm.
That was a leadership incubator, So those are the, history to the future as bookends. Why the 3 segments in the middle? So comparative studies. You got some folks, when you come to a conversation about race, work, and leadership, they want to know, how do you know that Black workers are experiencing challenges? How can you say that their career, that they have obstacles in their careers? Well, because we can compare them to
Mm.
their counterparts who have similar education, similar background, similar pedigree, and then look and see, where does your career take you in the next 10 to 20 years? And where do their careers take them in the
Yeah.
next 10 to 20 years? So we have one study that does a comparative analysis of Black graduates of Harvard Business School and their counterparts, or a subset of their counterparts, not the entire population of alumni, but we took a subset so we could do some comparisons. We have some comparisons of experiences of authenticity, experiences of engagement, just to be able to document that. The phenomenological lens, I know that's a heady word, that's a very abstract intellectual word. So let me just break down what the intent is in that section, to have a section where Black people are speaking with our own voices.
Yeah.
Okay? Where we're not reduced to numbers, where we don't have to justify the experience based on a statistical comparison or a p-value, but in our own voices, in our own lenses, we can tell our stories. And those quotes are powerful. And a lot of people hold on to the quotes in that section of the book. That section of the book is really compels and speaks to people in ways that the data, they're like, okay, I'm glad you have the data. It's good to have the quantitative data. It's all data, sorry, but I'm
Yeah.
glad you have the quantitative data. Great, good to see it. But what we hold on to are the stories that we share with one another about the
Mm.
journeys. And then the last piece is really about practice, which we talked about earlier. You know, why is practice important? Why do we need to connect? Why can't we, why not just put the theories and the frameworks and the statistics? No, we also need to talk about implications for practice. We want people who have leadership authority to be able to pick up this book and have a roadmap for what they should do
Yeah.
in leading more equitably and more justly in their organizations.
So as I'm reading the book, and some of you who saw my post on LinkedIn, might have been today, might have been yesterday, I can't remember. I think it was today actually. There were two concepts that stood out to me. One that I'm very aware of, right? You hear about the glass ceiling all the time, right? You get to middle management, might even have a nice salary, but when it comes time to go to the C-suite or right underneath the C-suite, I don't know, they call it the D-suite. I don't know what it is. Whatever's right beneath the C-suite, you just can't get there for whatever reason. And that I think most of us who are in our professional careers, we've heard about that. This other thing, the glass cliff, I was like, what's that? And it's an interesting metaphor for the experiences of Black leaders who get the seat, like not a seat at the table, but the seat at the table, right? You're the CEO, you're the president, you're the HNIC of whatever company, Fortune 500, the country, whatever. And so talk about the difference between the glass ceiling and the glass cliff.
Mm-hmm. So the glass ceiling is, as you described, um, just can't quite advance out of that middle management level. And there are a couple of reasons. One is bias related and one is structural, and of course they reinforce each other. But the bias related is just like, oh, prove it again, prove it
Mm,
again. Prove it again. Wait, can you do it though? Oh, I'm not sure we've seen enough from you. I'm not sure we've seen. I think we need to see you in this role a little bit longer. I think we need to see you on a different type of assignment before we can promote you. So it's for the people who are on the margins, like many Black professionals in many white dominant organizations, is prove it again.
yeah.
Whereas for the counterparts, it's, I think we can bet on their potential. I think this is a safe bet. They'll grow into it. Just give them the opportunity. They'll rise to meet the challenge. You see the difference?
Yep.
Okay. So that's one thing that's happening. Another thing that happens is, and this actually comes from comparative data in David Thomas and Jack Barrow's classic book, Breaking Through: The Making of Minority Executives, which came out in 1999, and you can read it and it still feels like it came out today.
Wow.
But there's another sort of bait and switch that happens, that many marginalized leaders or individuals get so tired of the prove it again, and they get so tired of the glass ceiling, they end up taking on leadership roles that are not valued by the C-suite. So you have the title, now you're a VP, you got a little bonus, but do you have a P&L responsibility? Can you, show how you are adding to the bottom line for your organization, or how you're increasing, reach from a market standpoint, or how you're cutting costs from an operations standpoint? If you're in community engagement, social impact, and now for many, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion,
That's right.
I value, don't get me wrong, but do it, as I always tell people, I value it and I'm passionate about it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and loving it. Don't do it because you think that's a stepping stone. Do
Because
it
it's
because you're
not.
passionate about it,
Yeah.
because it's not,
Yeah, it's
right?
not.
But people don't realize that because they've been so caught up in all the microaggressions and the macroaggressions and prove it again, prove it again, prove it again. They're just glad to finally get some kind of promotion. But
That's
that's not
right.
a promotion that's ultimately going to lead you to the C-suite.
Yeah.
So that's the glass ceiling, okay, or concrete
Mhm.
ceiling.
Mm.
Concrete ceiling, in fact, like it's so opaque at a certain point, you don't know what you think you're working and doing all the right things, but you don't really know what's going to get you up there. So that's why, like, glass ceiling is more for white women because of their proximity
Mm.
to the power base. These are your husbands,
Mm.
these are your fathers, these are your sons, these are your often your son-in-laws, or your cousins, or so and so. Like, you're in more intimate space, you're more likely as a white woman to be in intimate spaces with people who are in the most powerful positions. And so you get more of an inside scoop of what's happening, thus the
Yeah.
glass ceiling.
Yeah.
But the farther your proximity to that power base, from that power base, that ceiling's concrete.
That's right.
But there are some who still manage to get through. So the question that President Lynn Wooten, who is now president of Simmons College
I have to
in,
say
uh,
this.
in Boston.
Aggie Pride, because she went to my alma mater, North
Yes,
Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
she did, and she's on the board now
I
too.
know.
So
Yep.
she's a very proud alum. Um, and Dean Erica James, who is now the dean of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Suffice to say, the first Black woman dean of the Wharton School. Uh, but they wrote this chapter when they were in their prior roles.
Mm.
President Wooten was a dean at Cornell, and Dean James was the dean of Emory Guswetta's business school, which were still, high level
Yeah, for
responsibilities,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But it was interesting because they both had their new positions announced within like 10 days of COVID. I mean, mid February 2020. You talk about a glass cliff assignment.
Wow,
Well,
man.
what does a glass cliff mean? It means it's high stakes. Now you're in charge of leaders, of leading, and here we go. We hand you the bag. See what you can make of it. Now they're both brilliant leaders, so they made magic, and they're doing phenomenally. But it's general, and there's that was such a macro level crisis that it wasn't like just your organization is
Yeah.
faltering. It was like impacting all of higher ed, all at
Everybody.
once, right?
Yeah.
But it's still, I thought it was like poignant
Yeah.
that they would then find themselves in these new leadership roles at such a time. But for many Black leaders, many Brown leaders, like the ones in their study, your individual organization might be in crisis, a PR crisis, a performance crisis. And so then you end up in that leadership role. So then people ask, well, how come they picked you now?
Mm.
There are two arguments for that. With the glass cliff, one is, well, because you're uniquely positioned to be able to handle it. And that's what the many Black CEOs would say. Look, all right, I know how to deal with risk. I know how to deal with
Yeah.
people, not expecting that I'll be able to succeed. This is not new. I've been navigating some of these dynamics for quite a while in my career. So bring it. That's one. Another is it's like kind of a Hail Mary. That's one argument that people made
Yeah.
about Barack Obama becoming president, being elected president, and getting such widespread support. But when that really turned was when the economy crashed.
You know what? You just said something profound. You said it's like a Hail Mary,
Right.
right? So think
Right.
think about Hail Mary. And for those of you who are here, the chat, I figured out how to get the chat open. So you want to type comments in the chat, you can type comments in the chat. You said
Yeah.
Hail Mary. So Hail
Yeah.
Mary in football is a
Yeah.
situation where all you have is hope. You just
Right.
thought about, and what was Obama's
Hope.
theme?
Yes, we can.
It is
Yes,
hope.
we can.
And
Hope.
yes,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So then people were like, John McCain and Sarah Palin, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. let's go with this Hope guy,
Yeah.
because the Wall Street banks are crashing, the auto companies are crashing. I mean, right now we're like, oh yeah, that thing happened. Well, that was really significant. I
It
mean,
was
to see
bad.
Lehman Brothers go down, to
Yeah.
see the mortgage companies just crumble, to see the auto companies needing bailouts, like that was massive. And all of that happened like within weeks of the general election.
Mm,
So that's another way of thinking about glass cliff. But it's the Hail Mary, let's go on hope. Now, some people will ask, when we're having conversations about this in my classroom, are you just setting up this person?
mm, yeah.
And I said a lot about women CEOs. Do you think that they just set them up because they knew the situation was bad? They didn't want to be left holding the bag. And so they got a nice parachute and then put this other person here and set them up. So, I mean, I guess that's the word of caution that comes out of that
Yeah.
research. Every leadership title is not a good one. Every leadership opportunity is not one worth taking. Sometimes it's better to just like stay in your lane, do
Yeah.
you,
Do
and
you?
not just, not raise your hand for the title just because it looks impressive on paper, because you might land in a world of trouble, and not have the golden parachute on the other side to catch you
Yeah.
when your stuff goes down.
That's right. Yeah.
Fortunately, we're penalized more heavily for those mistakes.
Facts. That brings me to think about the chapter on, I think it was the chapter on women as leaders in the Black church or in Black religious organizations. There's
Yeah.
something the author said there where she talked about how leadership is defined um, within communities of Black women, within Black community. It doesn't mean that you have the highest paying job or that you've been labeled the boss necessarily. And sometimes like leadership is you having influence over the organization, which sucks because a lot of times, and I know this from my experience working with Black women have been the leaders, right? But they haven't been recognized institutionally as the leaders of change, as even diversity and inclusion leaders in the way that diversity and inclusion is effective. It hasn't been always the chief diversity officer who's doing it. It's the Black woman who's the full professor in STEM, who's the one that's getting it done in like really authentic ways. So that's an interesting point that you bring up about not all that glitters ain't gold, right? You know what I mean? Every leadership position is not a real leadership opportunity.
That's right. Titles don't equal leadership, and influence is not often acknowledged and rewarded. One of the so you have the one piece that highlights the ways in which Black women lead in these contexts, particularly around justice work. And I can give you a data point from the McKinsey and Company and Lean In reports on women in the workplace. They've been publishing an annual report for the past few years. The 2021 report just breaks down all of the ways in which women of color, and Black women in particular, have been leading the DEI efforts
Mm,
and
yeah,
initiatives.
thanks.
However, we've seen from 20 years of research that we are not the primary beneficiaries of these efforts.
Yeah.
With affirmative action, for instance, that white women are the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, but are the lead because it ticks the box on diversity.
That's
They are
right.
also the least likely to acknowledge that they have benefited from any special accommodations or privilege.
Yeah.
Which then explains a lot of unique things in organizations around leadership, around women working together and supporting women or not. It explains intersectional differences in voting patterns. So some people sort of enter into the diversity space when it's beneficial and when it's convenient, and then they're able to sort of enter out and align with, or move out and align with another base that they feel is more powerful, that might suit their needs. But Black women in the words of Trevor Noah, edited, cannot afford to mess around and find out.
Yeah.
So the other piece of why what he said in his last episode of The Daily Show, was it just last week? So
Yeah, I
much has
think
happened.
so. It was very recent. Yeah.
Um, but his closing words were a thank you to Black women's leadership, which is, often disappeared. And he talked about the tremendous influence that they have had on him and the way he thinks and the ways that Black women had contributed to The Daily Show. And Black women everywhere were just posting and reposting and reposting, like, thank you. Thank you for saying the thing. Thank you for saying the thing.
Yeah.
Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama. I mean, these are people who have been shaping our democracy and holding things together while we've been hanging on a thread, and through community organizing in cases, certainly with the Stacey Abrams, who has yet to be elected to public office. But I don't think anyone would deny the ways in which she leads in community.
Oh yeah, impact for sure.
And impact, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to think, when we're having these conversations, we have to step back and say, well, what is leadership? How do we define leadership? Just today, there was a public announcement that Harvard, since we're talking about
Oh
Harvard and we're
yeah,
talking
speak
about
on
the
it.
book,
Yeah,
I was
talk
like,
about
okay,
that.
let's
Talk
bring
about
this
that.
up.
That's very significant. Go
Um,
ahead.
so yes, so Claudine Gay, Dr. Claudine Gay, who was formerly the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, has been appointed the next president of Harvard University. Only the second woman in the history, and Harvard was founded in the 1600s. It's the oldest university in the US. And this is the second woman. The first was Drew Faust. So Claudine Gay, who is a Haitian Black woman.
Yeah. It's timely that we're having this
How about
conversation again.
that?
It
So I
is.
saw that post
Yeah.
and I said, you know what? We had this conversation right on time, Langston.
Yeah,
Because
we did.
where have we come? Where have we come?
Yeah.
On the one hand, we have a lot of things that we're still struggling with, and there are a lot of ways that people are still doing the brunt of the work, and we have a lot of unsung heroes who have been carrying us along and continue to carry us along. But today is a good day.
It is.
To acknowledge that gain. And I needed that to end my week, because I'm gonna tell you, yesterday was rough.
Okay.
Um,
Hump day can be like that sometimes.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just thinking about, again, Black leadership and influence and people who shape the culture and who bring joy to the Black community, and then to see that loss and that light with brother
Oh
Stephen,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
loss, he's a Black leader too. And I'm at UVA now. I'm a professor. So
Yeah.
this morning on Good Morning America, I heard from, Michael Strahan, a Black leader, interviewing one of the victims, one of the survivors
Yeah.
of the gun violence
Yeah.
at UVA, which took the lives of 3 vibrant Black men. And listening to this young man speak about his experience and his life, and so many other lives will be forever changed. And those 3 young men, it just makes today even more precious.
Yeah.
I don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
I don't take any of it for granted. The things that we have to go through to get to these moments, it's just incomprehensible.
Yeah. So I think, I wanted to talk about affinity fraud and managing Blackness versus eliminating racism. But I think since we're talking about those young men, we're talking about the first Black woman to be president of Harvard, I think this is a good time to talk about the future
Mm-hmm.
and talk about, as you all wrapped up the book,
Mm-hmm.
what were some of those things that we were seeing in the future? I know for me personally, one of the things that that stood out to me, and because I'm biased, because I'm considered a millennial, is that sometimes we don't feel the I don't want to say this, the strategic uplift of our
Yeah.
elders in meaningful ways. And there's times where there's tension, generational tensions and things like that. So talk about
Yeah.
some of the good things you see in the future and how we as a community of Black folk can get over some of those generational tensions as you see it.
Let's and so let's make some connections to the couple of other concepts, because I think they do help to inform the future. So, one, with affinity fraud, the question, I think, for each of us, as we have opportunities to influence and shape the environment, shape the context for other people, directly and indirectly, are we using our power for good?
Mm.
That's the question for the future. The chapter on affinity fraud is, how oftentimes in our own communities, like, we place false hope and false trust on people who are preying upon us to exploit our resources, to exploit our goodwill, to exploit our gifts. So the question that I pose for the future, for leaders today trying to shape the future is, are you using your power for good? Um, are you nurturing and supporting the health and the well-being of our community?
Mm.
Younger members of our community are suffering greatly. This is not an easy place or an easy time to grow up, to navigate life on a day to day. And so I was one of the things I had growing up, even in the context in which I
Mm.
grew up, I still had this naive hope, because that was part of the genre for Generation X. Was
Yeah.
like, you're gonna play this game, you're gonna follow the rules, you're gonna get your degrees, you're gonna do your thing, and then, you too might be president one day. Wink, wink. Though nobody ever thought really the president.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
far-fetched.
Yeah.
But it was sort of that, that anticipation. What the younger generation has to live with now is the reversal, the retrenchment,
Mm.
people pulling away rights and freedoms and liberties. I got to experience the advancement of
Yeah.
rights and liberties
Yeah.
and freedoms through my formative years. And I'm shook now
Yeah.
in living and watching things happen that are taking away rights from, my own communities and from other communities with which I consider myself to be an ally. So, but when I think about my kids, I think about my 9-year-old and my 14-year-old, and I think about what they've had to witness.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got to witness January 6th.
Yeah.
I, I'm excited about the Obama inauguration when my oldest child was, less than 1 year old.
Yeah.
They're watching January 6th.
I know.
So
Ooh.
what is our responsibility for them in helping them to have some measure of hope and assurance, and stability and security about, what the future will bring? So I think that's one piece.
Yeah.
The second, the managing Blackness. So here's the flip side, I think, about our strategies in the older generation, which I mentioned, was we're going to move forward. We're going to check the box. We're going to, play the game, the, try to get ahead and just, get yours, do what you have to do. Not so with millennials, definitely not so with Gen Z. And so there are actually two millennials who wrote that chapter, Managing
Mm.
Blackness. versus managing diversity. And they're like, if you really want a future in which diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging flourish, then you need to ensure that organizations are welcoming, that there are places where people feel they can come and bring our full selves,
Mm.
not our edited selves, not our, modified, altered, press and curl, sparkly
That's
selves,
right.
not our deferential selves, our yes ma'am, yes sir selves, but where we can bring our more authentic, culturally contextualized selves into these spaces and add value into the organization. And I would say that's where we really
Yeah.
intergenerationally just butt heads. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Black church life, and in leadership in Black church life. That's been a part of many years of my journey and my story as well. So I have seen that intergenerational piece play out. Um, and it just holds us back, it's
Yeah.
holding us back as communities. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. My line sisters and I were all relatively young. We pledged grad chapter, but most of us were recent college grads
Yeah.
on our line, and all were initiated in a chapter where the members were much older, our
Mm.
parents and grandparents' ages.
Yeah.
So that was a dynamic. And
Yeah.
yes, there's part of it like you need to learn the ropes. You need to understand, how we do things. Is important. Tradition is important. I want to capture history. I want to document history. Um, but I also try to remind people that that African American Student Union at Harvard Business School, that was founded by the students.
Yeah.
So much of the activism that we talk about now, we like to talk about Martin Luther King Jr., who was in his 20s. We talk about Rosa Parks like she was 70 years old with the
She
Montgomery
wasn't.
bus boycott. She was
Yeah.
not. She was 40 something, like in her early 40s. These are younger people who have led significant changes toward equity and justice. And so I worry that with us spending more time connecting through social media and less time connecting in our institutions and in our
Mm.
communities,
Yeah.
that we're not developing leaders. I mean, it's always been a struggle, but I feel like at this point we're not having the intergenerational exchanges of leadership. So leaders are developing, but they are finding their own ways to do it. And I feel like we could do more.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, it's they were not happy about how you all were rocking the boat at Harvard. Right. They were like, you better go up there, get your degree, and stop going up there and making waves. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I wanna give an opportunity now, as you talk to my cousin Kelly, in the chat for folks to ask questions. And so, if you have a question that you want to ask Dr. Morgan Roberts about the book, a topic or a concept that you want her to talk a little bit more about, or just a concept or a question in general about race, work, and leadership, feel free to type it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. And Adrian, I do see your question about, excuse me, sending a transcript and a copy of this to everyone who joined tonight. I will send a recording, and I will work on getting a transcribed for you. I haven't done that in the past, but I'll try to work on it. So, are there any questions that you all have? Like I said, you can type it in the chat or you can use the Q&A. And as we wait for that, I'll ask a question. If no one has a question, it'll be our final question for the day. And so I'm looking at the book, right? Race, Work, and Leadership, New Perspectives on the Black Experience. As we were talking before, there were a number of people who submitted, right,
Yeah.
chapters
Mhm.
for the book.
Yeah.
What is something that you wish you could have put in here, but there was no room? Because you can't put everything in there. If there was a
Right,
mixtape of race,
right.
work, and leadership,
Yeah,
what would be on that mixtape?
yeah. Well, we talked about how this book covers so many sectors. So I've talked a lot about business tonight. I mentioned we had data from lawyers, we've got the community organizers, we have K-12 education, we have higher education, financial services, other professions. What we don't have um, are the artists.
Mm,
We don't have the artist stories. So I have a lot of energy right now around if I had, another volume, if we had to do the mixtape part 2, it would bring in the artists
yeah,
um, as the innovators, as the activists, as the keepers of the culture, but also as engines of the economy.
yeah,
So I think there's a lot for us to say. There's a lot for us to learn. There are a lot of sobering lessons about how Black artists have been taken advantage of economically, exploited economically, um, while also, held up in service of being cultural icons. It's that duality,
yeah.
feeling bamboozled, as Spike Lee said
Hmm. That's
years
right.
ago. Um, and it just it makes my heart ache when I think about the ways in which so many gifted people who contribute so much to our lives and our livelihoods, um, they aren't able to experience the full joy
Yeah,
of that because something is missing in that equation around the economics of it and the politics of it, and the creative aspect of it.
yeah,
I write a little poetry myself, so I'm not an artist in that on the levels of those that I'm thinking about, but I do from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
yeah,
Um, I self-published my poetry. That was a choice that I made, that I don't want to go with a major publisher because I don't want to give up the rights to my voice and to my
yeah.
words in this particular format. So I self-publish. It is
All right.
available on Amazon, which is,
Okay.
that has a little, but my compilation is called Almost Free. My latest compilation is called Almost Free. So race, work, and leadership starts with one of my poems, because there's a lot to say about these topics that a survey or a quote is not going to give you.
Yeah,
So much of what inspires us and encourages us and really makes us feel and makes us desire, to connect and change, it really comes through the arts.
that's right.
So
And
that's what I
so,
would add. That's what's not there, but that's what I would add, and I hope to be able to do that at some point in the next couple of years.
so again, before we go, say the name of the poetry book so that we have it for the audience.
Oh, it's almost free. Let me see if I can show it. Um, yeah, it's almost free, but it might not. Yeah, I think I'm on. Yeah,
There we
there
go.
it,
We got it. We got a good, nice little look about
there
it.
it is.
Almost free. Okay, I like that graphic too. So,
Uh,
so for those of you who joined us, here's your homework, right? You can get this book, Race, Work, and Leadership, New Perspectives on the Black Experience. And I will say one thing I want to say about this book is that if you work in any organization, right? And there's a time where you're having a conversation about diversity, inclusion, or things of that nature, equity, that this is a book that should stay in leadership's office because you can study this. This is almost like this is like it's like reading a Bible, right? I wouldn't suggest someone, although I didn't read the book all the way through, like this is a book you can come back to.
don't read it all the way through in
Yeah,
one sitting. No,
don't
no, no,
don't
no.
do that.
Take little pieces.
Yeah, take little pieces, right? And it's organized thematically. So if there's a particular situation that you're dealing with, you can open up the book and you can go to something that speaks to that. situations. So this is a book to be studied, a book to be referenced continuously. I think it's the type of book that you will never get done reading. And of course, workshop book, exactly, Marshawn. And of course, make sure that you check out Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts' poetry as well. So Dr. Morgan Roberts, I want to thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights about race, work, and leadership. And any final words?
I would say look back on 2022 and think about the journey that you've taken. Think about all of the different things that you overcame, all of the things that manifested for you, where you were this time last year. And regardless of the highs and the lows, you made it.
That's
You're
right.
here. And that's a blessing. That's a gift. And we need you. So keep leading, keep living, keep loving, and wish you all the best. I'm so appreciative of this opportunity to talk with you tonight.
And thank you again. There y'all have it. So before the audience leaves, Dr. Morgan Roberts, again, thank you for coming. You can bounce if you want to, but I'm just going to give the audience insights into what we're going to be doing in the coming New Year's. So if you all give me one moment, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about what we got going on coming up here as we enter 2023. Give me 1 second. I can make a quick adjustment. And so here we go. And for those of you who came a little bit late, I have another podcast called the African Americans in Sport Podcast. Be sure to check that out. It's based upon some coursework that I used to teach about the broad experiences of African Americans in sport. But what I really want to talk to you about is what we got going on for New Year's. And so here in San Antonio, there's a series of community curated events called Dream Week, which commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. So we have 4 different events happening in January. The first one is with Cleve Masidor, who is the director of the Blockchain Foundation. Yes, we're talking about everything crypto and tech starting in January. So we're taking a little bit different spin. These are Black folks who are entrepreneurs in the new economy. So Cleve is an expert on blockchain technology, on the Black and Brown experience. And she's going to talk to us about how Black folks and brown folks have been involved with blockchain technology since 2009, which is almost the very beginning of it because Bitcoin, I think, dropped in 2008. Then we have a conversation with law professor Tonya Evans, who was in 2021, I believe, one of Forbes 50 under 50, 50 over 50 award winners. And she is an expert on the legal aspects of NFTs, blockchain technology, and making sure that you own the rights to the content that you produce. She's a law professor at Penn State University, and she's going to give us some really in-depth insights and looks at that. Then we're going to have a brother who is the CEO of Blockcell. And so he's going to talk about the intersection of blockchain technology and telecommunications. And part of the reasons why I want to have these conversations about blockchain technology is because I think there's a lot of curiosity in Black community about blockchain technology, and people have heard of Bitcoin, but that may not really understand the full applications of what can be done. And so this brother is an expert on those intersections and how the technology can be used to make our lives better as it relates to the production of goods and services and things of that nature. And finally, we're going to end January with a conversation with a brother by the name of Preston James. He is an angel investor and the founder of Div Inc., a nonprofit incubator and supporter of Black, minority, and women-owned tech startups based out of Austin, Texas. This will be a hybrid event, and so there will be some people who are going to join us in person. There'll be other folks who can join us for this lunchtime conversation virtually as well. And so last but not least, if you want to get access to our events continuously and on a more regular basis, you can support the show by becoming one of our patrons, one of our founding 55 patrons of the show. And we want to use those funds to not only continue to support the endowment that I've started at North Carolina A&T, but we want to hire an intern to help with the production of the show. So if you want to continue to support what we do, you want to have access to our content, more regularly. These recordings are produced as a podcast, and so you all will get early access to that, and then also access to all of our virtual discussions. Excuse me, you'll get access to our discussions at least once a month. So appreciate you all for joining us. I want to give a shout out to Kimberly, Ifeoma. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. Marshawn, appreciate you being here. Rodney, appreciate you showing up. And you all have happy holidays and happy New Year. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you.